Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. This supercomputing technology has been around for decades, but the world changed in November with the introduction of ChatGPT, the AI app that lets anyone harness the power of this amazing technology. AI is being used to write term papers, create songs, and clone voices, and you can be sure criminals around the world are already looking for ways to use the power of AI to scam you. I'm Herb Weisbaum, a contributing editor at checkbook.org.
Welcome to Consumerpedia at checkbook.org. We're the nonprofit that helps consumers select services, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on checkbook.org to be completely independent and objective. Now, here's the host of Consumerpedia, America's consumer expert, the consumer man, Herb Weisbaum.
Fax machines, email, text messages, the internet. Criminals always find ways to use new technology to their benefit. So what will they do with the power of AI? We have three experts ready to talk about this. Chester Wisniewski is Field Chief Technology Officer for Applied Research at Sophos. That's the global digital security company. Chester is based in British Columbia.
Hey, Herb. Good to talk to you again.
Lori Craner is the director of the Scilab Security and Privacy Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. I first met Lori when she was the chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission. Lori's joining us from Pittsburgh.
Hello.
And Brett Johnson, a former criminal who specialized in identity theft. At one time, he was on the Secret Service 10 Most Wanted list. They called Brett the original Internet Godfather. After serving about 6 years in prison, Brett decided to turn his skill set into fighting fraud. He's now a consultant, public speaker, and podcast host. Brett lives in Alabama.
Howdy, Herb. How are you?
Good to talk to you again. So, Brett, you told me that during your life of crime, you stole about $7 million, and clearly you use technology to do that. Is artificial intelligence going to help fraudsters do a better job?
Oh, it absolutely will. It already is. I mean, we're already seeing AI being used in a couple of different services being offered in Worm GPT and also Fraud GPT. One of them costs $60 a month. The other one costs $90 a month. One is concentrated on scam emails, phishing emails, writing code, stuff like that. I would expect that as AI continues to improve, the ability of criminals will continue to increase as well. The scalability, things like that. I mean, the sky is absolutely the limit as far as AI goes with benefiting cyber criminals.
You think you would have been more effective at stealing money if you had had AI at your controls?
I think I would have been able to scale it up better. Is the issue. You figure now that, talking about the growth of cybercrime, if cybercrime were a country today, it would have the third largest economy on the planet. All right, so it's already huge as it is, but you've got a lot of individuals that are engaged in cybercrime these days that are not really technically sophisticated. They don't know how to write code. They're not very good about coming up with phishing emails or anything else like that. Well, AI will absolutely lend to that. Not only will it make that easier for those unsophisticated criminals, but it will take a lot of the heavy lifting away from the more experienced criminals. You figure that it takes a lot of time to launch these scams or financial cybercrimes that you're trying to perpetrate. If you can hand off a lot of those functions to an AI type system and let that do it for you until it's ready to hand it over to a human attacker that's going to be involved, it makes it much more scalable, much easier to commit, much more profitable at the end of the day.
So, Lori, as a cybersecurity researcher and also someone who worked at the Federal Trade Commission, I would assume you agree with Brett that this is going to just make life easier for the criminals of the world?
I think it will make life easier for the criminals, but it will also help the defenders who will be able to use AI to help detect these sorts of crimes.
And we're going to talk about more about that later in the podcast because that's a very interesting topic. Chester, you actually demonstrated at a cyber conference how criminals might be able to use artificial intelligence. Can you tell us about that?
Some of my colleagues presented at the Artificial Intelligence Village at the DEF CON conference in Las Vegas. And what they were kind of showing is how you can use this technology to kind of create an entire scam ecosystem from front to back with all the supporting stuff, right? You can have AI write the website that you use for the attack. You can have AI generate fake LinkedIn profiles that make the people that allegedly run the business look legitimate. You can use AI to help you collect the credit card information for the fake e-commerce site that you had AI write for you. Right. The idea is you can kind of generate an entire scam environment without really having any skill or time invested to do so. In a world where we already struggle with what is authenticity, this is kind of not a great thing.
I would agree with that. You had mentioned, how does it help the good guys compared to how does it help the bad guys? Understand that the bad guys, and I say we because I used to be one, we are not reeled in by existing systems or regulations, privacy concerns, management, things like that. So we've got an open playing field with which we can use some sort of AI type system. All right. And we can use it for any number of things. But the good guys, they're having to kind of shoehorn in these AI systems into existing fraud controls that are in place. Not only fraud controls, but privacy concerns, regulations, things like that. As such, the way that it benefits criminals is much more effective. So while the good guys are having some difficulty implementing AI systems, the bad guys really have an open playing field with which to do that. And I think they're going to be, at least at the beginning, much more successful than the good guys are.
I totally disagree with that, actually, because when I look at it, the reality is all the data scientists that are required to build these sophisticated tools like ChatGPT or any of the other ones requires millions and dollars of data scientists, not to mention access to huge quantities and ability to collect and process data in order to train a lot of these, especially the generative AI models like ChatGPT. And the reality is the criminals don't have access. They have access to the technology, but they don't have access to the knowledge, and they don't have access to the expertise. And they generally will do the cheapest, simplest thing to commit a crime as opposed to over-architecting some complicated engineering in order to develop their own AI models. So what we see today available to criminals simply lets them accelerate and economize what they're already doing. It doesn't make better attacks. It just makes attacks more voluminous or gives more sophistication to people who may lack it. It allows more people to gain entry to the ability to do crimes, but the crimes aren't any more sophisticated than the existing crimes. It's just sort of automating it. A colleague said to me once, it doesn't sharpen the spear, it broadens the head. Like, we're going to see more attacks, but they're not going to be any more sophisticated than what we already see. Whereas the good guys with the data scientists and access to all this information are able to use this to empower less skilled individuals to be more able to detect crime using these technologies, in my opinion.
I respect that opinion. I can't really disagree with that opinion, but I would say that as the victim count increases, it kind of evens out on both sides of the fence with that, right? I mean, sure, you can educate people on the good guy side as much as you want to, but if you broaden that spear and hit even more victims at the end of the day, the good guys can only cope with so many victims at a time.
Well, and it's probably important to differentiate. My headspace is in protecting enterprises, not protecting individuals. So when I look at professional IT people with access to these tools, they're going to be more effective than they were before. When we're talking about average people who are getting scammed day in, day out, they're helpless. They don't have access. They don't have any filter in front of them. And so I think it will disproportionately affect normal individuals than it will affect businesses.
Lori, since you brought up this topic, how do you think good guys are going to use AI to help fight the bad guys?
I think there are a few things that good guys can do. Part of it is having the good guys also scale. Just as the criminals are going to scale, so can the good guys. We have a shortage of cybersecurity workers right now, but if we can use AI to scale our ability to perform tasks, that's really going to help. I think we may also be able to use AI so that we can put in a home computer user's web browser or phone or whatever AI that's going to help them detect scams. That's not something that we do in a very sophisticated way today. We're basically just doing like keyword filtering, but it seems like we should be able to scale that with AI into something much more sophisticated. It won't happen tomorrow, but it should be able to happen soon.
Lori, Federal Trade Commission, other consumer advocates always say there are things you can do now to spot the frauds, for instance, bad syntax, bad grammar, with testimonials or reviews if they use the same words over and over again, etc. But that's going to change with AI because the AI can write perfect English or perfect whatever language the scammers want to use, and can also create an individual review or testimonial, every single one. It doesn't have to cut and paste. Am I right with that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different advice that's been given to consumers about how to detect scams. And I was actually never super excited about the advice that said, scammers just, have typos and spelling errors and look unprofessional. Because even without AI, a scammer can just make a perfect copy of an existing website or existing mail from a vendor and send it to you.
Right.
And, just change the URL. So they were already doing that without AI. So in the work that I did on training consumers, that was never what I trained them to do.
What about better fake reviews and fake testimonials?
I'm not sure how much consumers really rely on that. It's actually very easy for people to fall for scams. They don't have to be very sophisticated for people to fall for them. People just act very quickly. Somebody who's taking the time to really read through the reviews and testimonials is already like thinking a lot more than most people who are falling for the scams like very quickly. The scammers haven't had to do sophisticated things because they can scam people without being sophisticated.
So, how do you navigate a world where everything can be faked? Are there ways for you to protect yourself? We're going to talk about that next. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, and this is Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
If you like what you hear, we hope you'll consider being a Consumerpedia supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. This is Consumerpedia.
We're back. Lori, are we already at the point where it's hard to trust what we hear and see?
Yeah, I think we are. I think, we have fairly primitive ways of faking things that people seem to fall for. So yeah, it's hard to know what's real.
But it's going to get easier with AI, and maybe you can attack bigger surfaces, meaning instead of going after you and me, you could go after some corporation and get a whole lot of money all at once.
Yeah, I think it's only going to get worse. There are various proposals to kind of watermark things to try to address this problem, but I haven't heard a proposal that I think is actually workable, because if you watermark all of the real stuff and then the bad guys go and remove the watermark, then they'll try to make it look like the real stuff is actually fake, and then the fake stuff is real. And I just am not entirely sure how we tackle this.
Brett?
I mean, it's a problem. I've said for years that the perception of truth is much more important than the truth itself, that facts don't matter. The only thing that matters is what you can convince someone of. So you add deep fakes into that equation. Now, if you've got real-time deep fakes that are being assisted by AI, where I can have a real-time conversation with someone on camera or over the phone, how effective is that? So that's the type of problems that we've got now. We can no longer, it's difficult to trust the news. It's difficult to trust what we see with our eyes, what we hear on the radio, or anything else like that. And it's going to continue to get worse.
Chester?
I think we sometimes approach these problems the wrong way, right? We can't prove a negative. So, of course, anything we see could be a fake when we're just looking at it visually. But we are making some progress in being able to prove that real things are real. So, for example, Sony's digital cameras now digitally sign every image that they take. Now, that photo, when it's put on the cover of Time magazine or when it's put on a website, might have been brightened or altered to make the color saturation better, or it might have been cropped, in which case that signature doesn't mean anything. But it does mean a journalist can prove, I actually took this photo. The guy in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, I can prove that was a real photo if I've taken it with a digital camera that does this. So I think we can improve how we at least allow journalism to maintain and demonstrate their authenticity and their integrity, and then assume everything that hasn't been verified, well, it's probably fake. And I mean, I think, unfortunately, we're getting so pessimistic. A lot of people are. My mother now is so pessimistic that when she gets real warnings about security stuff from her financial institutions, she throws them away, assuming they're scams. So there is a real danger here, like, of people getting too cynical too. So this is a really weird tightrope we're going to be walking as we go forward.
And this may be critical, this watermarking, as we go through the campaign season for election of president of the United States. There could be all kinds of deep fakes created by who knows who. That's what scares me.
Well, I mean, we've already seen that with the Ukraine war, right? We saw a deep fake of Zelensky saying they had surrendered at one point. So these things are absolutely in play and in use.
And the Pope in a puffy jacket.
Right. So the news is filled with stories about how scammers are using AI to fake voices. So they can sample a voice of your child or your grandchild, maybe from social media posts, and then they call you and the computer-generated voice sounds like that child. It seems like a lot of extra work for a scam that's been working really successfully for the last 25 or 30 years or more. I'd like to get all three of you to share with me if you think this is really happening and whether you think we're going to see more of this if it's really worth the effort. So I'm going to start with you, Chester.
Well, I don't think it's happening the way it's being portrayed as happening, but I also don't doubt that it could be happening in the future when it's easier to do. I think today the resources involved and the quality of the tools that are available to the general public is too much effort for too little reward for criminals to bother. And I think, Brett, he very specifically said in real time, right? It's not in real time right now, which means all you can do is maybe pre-generate a short clip and then take over the traditional scam. So maybe, that's easy enough that it might be happening. But I suspect that it's time for FBI to justify some budget, and they're just overhyping something that I think it's being done the old-fashioned way at the moment. But I don't think we should ignore this, because I think it's only a matter of a very short period of time before this is simple enough and will be in real time that we should be planning for it now, even if it's not happening today.
And Chester, you told me about someone you spoke to in one of these situations that we reported in the news. Could you share that story?
Well, yeah. This was an older woman who had gotten one of these calls saying that her grandchild had been kidnapped, and then she needed to send some ransom money right away or they were going to harm her. And the evidence that who was quoted in a story as being one of the victims who had the AI of her granddaughter, all it was a woman's scream, and then a man came on the phone and demanded the ransom. So there was no ability to determine whether it even sounded like her granddaughter, let alone be an AI deepfake.
Brett?
I agree with everything Chester says. You've got a lot of security companies that are out there right now that are hyping the AI fraud angle, all right? And the truth of the matter is that it's not really advanced enough for fraudsters to be using it en masse, all right? Especially if we're talking about deep fakes and especially real time. Real time is not even out there right now. Now it's coming. It will absolutely get there, but it's way too difficult right now for fraudsters to do that. If you're looking at a scam like that, the purpose of the scamster, the goal is to get the potential victim to act out of emotion, not out of reason or logic. So if you call 2 o'clock in the morning, you're acting like that grandchild that you barely get to speak to 3 or 4 times a year, and you're trying to scare them to give that knee-jerk reaction, you don't need a deep fake voice to make that successful. It's all about causing that potential victim to put aside logic, put aside reason. Now, later on, as AI continues to improve, when we get to that real-time deepfake ability, I think that we'll see this trickle-down aspect of cybercrime that's kind of inherent throughout the entire cybercrime environment. So you take one specific type of technique, it starts in one vertical, and as it becomes more ubiquitous, it bleeds through all the other fraud verticals that are out there. That's what will end up happening, but we're nowhere near that right now.
And having talked to you, Brett, criminals like quick and easy, not a lot of effort. And, I've covered this for 25 years, and having a voice in the background off phone going, "Grandma, it's me." And it's like, "Is that you, Charlie?" "Yes, Grandma, it's me." That's work to steal a whole lot of money from people. They don't have to go to all the trouble trying to sample your voice and create something in real time.
No, absolutely. And you got to understand, too, that, there are 3 motivations for why cybercrime happens. You've got status, cash, ideology. 98% plus of attacks are cash-based attacks. That's lowest hanging fruit. That's a criminal that's looking for the easiest access that gives the largest return on that criminal access. So they're not looking to spend a lot of money. They're not looking to take a lot of time or effort. They're looking for the easiest access that gives them the most profit on that access.
Lori, could this AI, this creation of someone else's voice, could that be used by the criminals who are going for the long take, the deep haul, so you can have the boss scam where the boss is overseas and they know the boss is overseas and it's contacting the assistant back in the U.S. and saying, "I'm overseas, I'm trapped, I need you to wire me $10,000. Would that be worth the effort? Is that how this might be used?
I think it's definitely more likely to be used on these high value targets. Another point I'll make about the low value targets is I think in a lot of these, they don't even know the name of the grandchild and they don't have access to a sample of the voice. Like, in order to train the AI, you need to find out who the grandchild is, get a sample of their voice, and then you can train the AI to do that. I don't think they even go that far. If you have a high value target, then you have a situation where it's worth taking the effort to find, the name of the boss. And if it's a high profile person, their voice is readily available to get a sample of. And then I think there's more of a chance that it would be worth the effort for the bad guys to actually go through and do that.
Yeah, never underestimate how lazy criminals are.
I would not call us lazy. I would call us, we look for the avenue of least resistance.
Very well put. By the way, it sure does make a good broadcast story when a correspondent can go to a digital security company and say, find my voice online and then make me say all these kinds of things. And they're like, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. But the pretend criminal, the digital security company, knows whose voice you're looking for and what to do. And as Lori, as you pointed out, a lot of times they have no idea. They're just making these calls and it's the victim who gives them the name. The victim says, Johnny, is that you? Susie, is that you? They don't even know what voice to sample.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about some possible ways that you might be able to protect yourself as we boldly move into this world of artificial intelligence. I'm Herb Weisbaum, and you're listening to Consumerpedia, powered by checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia Fast Facts. Artificial intelligence is already a part of daily life. Smart speakers and digital assistants, like Siri, are powered by AI. So are the map programs we all rely on. AI helps predict the weather, diagnose diseases, create new drugs. It's also being used to develop self-driving cars. Surveys show most business executives are sold on AI. They believe it can drive growth and cut costs. By one estimate, the global market for AI will top $190 billion by 2025.
All right, so how do we protect ourselves in this brave new world of artificial intelligence that is going to empower all of us, including the criminals in the world? I'd like all three of you to answer this question. Is AI simply going to make the criminals more effective at the current scams, which means we protect ourselves the same way we're doing now? Or is it going to allow them to create new scams? So is just old scams better effectiveness, or are there going to be new scams you think that'll be created by this? And Chester, we're going to start with you.
Well, I don't have the creativity that some of these criminals do when I see some of the scams coming down the pike sometimes. So I can't really say that they won't come up with new ways, but certainly from what I see available today with the tools that are accessible and usable enough that criminals would bother using them, I think it's just going to be a higher quantity of slightly more, let's call them high definition scams, right? Like when foreign criminals were writing scams, there often were grammatical mistakes, there were spelling mistakes, and I don't think it was ever a great technique for deciding something was a scam, but it was another tell. And that tell is now officially gone. It was already largely gone, and now it's completely gone. If you get a text-based scam, whether it's on your WhatsApp or an SMS message or an email, you can pretty much count on it being perfect American English, Canadian English, British English, whatever it needs to be, because these tools have made that ubiquitously accessible to create scams. And so I think today we're mostly just going to see higher volumes of high definition scams.
Brett?
So I don't like the idea of new scams, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at attacks, that attack landscape that's out there, 90% plus of every single attack uses a known exploit. It's not unknown vulnerabilities. It's not zero-day attacks. It's the stuff we've typically been told about for years that we're not doing anything about that creates that threat landscape. So you add in an AI-type system that's better able to navigate that threat landscape that's already available, and I think at that point, you start to ping new areas that are out, and maybe new ideas are coming to fruition from that. You take, for example, the pandemic. Government fraud was already a thing before the pandemic, but most of the cyber criminals that were out there were not really hitting the government sector. The pandemic changed that. Now you've got one of the primary focuses of most cyber criminals today is looking at government benefit fraud. That's simply because that opened up a new view or an insight that criminals could look at and try to exploit at that point in time. I think that's what AI does at the end of the day, is it allows that viewing angle to increase for cyber criminals. Until we get to the point that we're plugging those 90% of exploits that we already know about, that we're not doing anything about, I think that AI will continue to eat things alive.
And it's like, you call it Bitcoin, I call it Ponzi. It's a different version of the same thing, right? It's just, it's now digital.
Lori, do the same rules then apply as to how we protect ourselves, all the rules that consumer advocates and federal regulators have shared with us all these many years? Is that it's the same scam, just with maybe a little bit better polish to it?
I think for now, yeah, I think a lot of the same rules apply. And I agree that it's likely we're going to just see the old scams on steroids. I do have some concerns that we may see some new ways of composing scams that people hadn't thought of before, that basically the AI can run through all the possible combinations and maybe hit on some combinations that we just hadn't thought of that turn out to be like really effective. That may be something that we see. But yeah, as far as protecting yourselves, I think the biggest advice is to be skeptical and, think before you click and think about, is something too good to be true? Does something make sense? Does it all add up? Like, that advice still holds even with AI.
Yeah. Chester, you have an example of how AI could be used to make criminals' lives easier, the ones that commit the romance scams.
Sure. I mean, we're seeing lots of these interactive scams, often related to romance or sometimes cryptocurrency or other things like that. And it's quite a human intensive thing. The way it works today is you're getting a message over text message or a WhatsApp message, typically, maybe Facebook Messenger, this type of thing. And they're interacting with you to kind of build some rapport before they go for the kill to get some money from you. And that is quite human intensive. I mean, a couple of our researchers have done a few publications on this recently. And like often when they, reach back out to the romance scammer, they might not get a response for a couple hours because there's a human that had to, reply to them to keep the scam going. And certainly with the automated nature of artificial intelligence and its ability to hold a conversation, basically, if you've played with tools like the free ChatGPT on OpenAI's website, it's a pretty plausible human being. So you could imagine being able to shorten the time scale and the human effort. And this goes back to things I think we've talked about throughout this interview, where we're really accelerating, right? If there's humans behind these scams today, they can only maybe manage 50 victims at a time that they're interacting with. But if you can suddenly tie an AI into getting somebody 80% of the way through the scam, then, one human handler now can handle 1,000 or 5,000 victims at a time. And that, of course, just increases the scalability of these attacks.
Hey, Brett, will AI make it easier for cyber criminals to hack passwords, or do they already have the sophisticated algorithms they need, assuming you're using a good password?
No, that's already there. And this idea of using a good password, you've got 80% of the population uses the same or similar passwords across logins on different websites. So it's not really, I don't think AI is going to substantially affect that particular dynamic of cybercrime. We need to, and we're moving over to passkeys now, things like that as well. But the issue is that cyber criminals have already anticipated things like that. You can say it's a game of cat and mouse, but it's a game of either being reactive or proactive. And unfortunately, the good guys tend to be more reactive than proactive.
So we're just about out of time. Let me finish by going around the horn and leave us with one tip, one thing you want us to know to help protect ourselves before we leave. And Lori, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think people just need to think before they react. Think before you click, before you text, definitely before you send money, and be skeptical of what you read and think about, is this plausible in this situation? And don't rush to give away personal information, passwords, money, bank account numbers, anything like that.
Chester?
I'm going to focus on the impersonation side of this because I think it's one of the more interesting areas where people can be empowered to protect themselves better. Whether they're impersonating your boss, asking you to go buy gift cards, whether they're impersonating the kidnapped granddaughter or whatever particular thing it is. When it's related to impersonation, you have two tools in your tool bag. One, challenge the person who's claiming to be who they say they are with something that is not publicly available that a criminal would know. What did you send me for my birthday to the granddaughter, last year? Or maybe if it's the boss with the gift cards, it's like perhaps you mention an internal project and ask if it's related to that, or something that is not easy for a criminal to know. The other thing you can do is use a second method of communication to verify it. If you really believe it might be real and you get an email or a text from the boss, call the boss on the phone and say, hey, why do you need these gift cards? Or if it's the granddaughter calling you, maybe you text her or some Facebook Messenger or something, FaceTime on your iPhone to confirm that it really is the person who says it is. And those are things that the criminals really can't bypass.
Great information. So slow down and don't trust and verify.
Absolutely.
And finally, Brett.
I mean, I like all the answers so far. What I would say is understand what a criminal is looking for. We look for information, access, data, or cash. If you get any type of unsolicited engagement that asks for any of that, you need to be cautious immediately. More importantly, you need to develop this idea of situational awareness. In the real world, in the physical world, we are very situationally aware. We know when we take a wrong turn and end up in a bad neighborhood, or if something's going wrong in a store, our hackles raise. But for some reason, that situational awareness is not very good at translating to an online environment. We need to understand that there are predators in these online waters. If we can get to that, if we can trust but verify and just understand that we need to protect ourselves and always be vigilant and develop that situational awareness, all these other things will come with that. That's my firm belief.
Lori, Brett, Chester, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this edition of Consumerpedia. We hope you'll rate this episode and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember, we release new episodes every other Thursday. Another way you can support this show is to follow us on Consumerpedia on Facebook and Instagram, and at My Consumerpedia on Twitter. I'm Herb Weisbaum. Thanks for listening.
Consumerpedia is a public service of checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that helps you save money and make smarter choices. You can count on Checkbook to help you find the best services and avoid the worst, with local ratings that are accurate and unbiased. If you live in or around these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis-St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. To get your free 30-day subscription, go to checkbook.org/consumerpedia. If you like what you've heard, we hope you'll become a supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. Consumerpedia, empowering consumers to save money and make smarter choices.